If Poland is fast becoming NATO's gatekeeper in northeastern Europe, there is one country that could follow suit on the southeastern flank. I'm talking about Romania. In this case, we aren't going to tell you that it's about to multiply its military, or that they're going to buy hundreds of tanks or anything like that. Right now, such crazy ambitions are the exclusive territory of the Poles. Among other reasons because that country has much more industrial and economic muscle than today's protagonist. So the Romanians are on a totally different path. And check out this news item.
Ukrainian wheat ship hit by Russian missile near Romanian waters.
This occurred in September 2024. It will come as no surprise that this was not an isolated case. What is certain is that Russian maritime attacks on Ukrainian civilian vessels in the Black Sea waters are relatively frequent. These are attacks that have been occurring since the beginning of the invasion in 2022, with both anti-ship missiles and sea mines. And of course, in Romania, a country whose only access to maritime trade is through the Black Sea, well, as you can imagine, all this is generating enormous concern. And that's precisely why the Romanians are about to make a U-turn in their defense policy. Because so far, well, let's just say that the Romanian armed forces have been rather modest. To give you an idea, their main tanks are Romanian TR-85s, with modifications to meet NATO standards. They even have some 160 Soviet T-55s in their inventory, a model that was launched more than 70 years ago, so basically an antique. And naturally, the Air Force and the Navy are not in great shape either. Romania has a small fleet of just under 30 F-16 fighters that are now being added to its stock, as until recently it only operated old Soviet MiG-21s. And the Navy, well, it has a total of 3 frigates, 2 of which are second-hand British and a handful of warships. In other words, we are basically dealing with armed forces that have yet to be built. And guess what? That's just what the Romanians have now set out to do. Now, before I tell you how they are going to do it, the most important question is, why? Why does Romania now suddenly want to catch up with its military capabilities and at full speed? Isn't it supposed to be a NATO country? It shouldn't need anything else, right? Well, you see, the reason is that its role in the Black Sea could absolutely be crucial, both for keeping open the new route followed by Ukrainian merchant ships, and also to strengthen NATO's own capabilities on the eastern flank. Of course, as I said before, the journey in this case is very different from the Polish one, starting with the cash. As you can see, the Romanians, although they are already above the 2% of military spending on GDP set by NATO, are far behind the wild Polish effort. In any case, this represents a significant increase in its military budget, which is expected to continue to grow strongly in the coming years. I think we could say here that the Romanians are starting to have a pretty clear picture, and that is gradually making them get their act together.
Romania president blames missed defense spending target on budget issues. After failing to meet the 2% GDP threshold for several years, Romania has allocated a record budget for the defense sector for 2024.
Between 2023 and 2024, defense spending has increased by more than 50%, and now its new plans call for spending $46.3 billion over the next 5 years in order to catch up. This means that they will probably reach 3% of GDP in military spending, an effort well above that required by NATO. Now, the question is, how exactly do they intend to spend this money? Well, as we've already told you, it's a military expansion radically different from the one Poland is undertaking. Firstly, because the military effort in absolute terms will remain much more modest. Romania is a much smaller economy. And secondly, because while Poland is making its effort mainly on ground forces, as we talked about in a recent video here on VisualPolitik, the Romanian case is going to follow a very different path. Yes, on the internet, you can all read that Romania has bought a few dozen Abrams tanks from the United States, missiles from its Patriot batteries, Chiron anti-aircraft systems, and South Korean K-9 howitzers. But that's as far as it goes, because in fact everything suggests that the Romanians will continue to bet on having rather small ground forces. But of course the point is that it's not all soldiers, tanks and artillery. Therefore, in this case we're talking about the fact that the Romanian objective may be to become NATO's major air operations center in the entire continent. And you may ask, shouldn't it be more of a naval power because of the geography you just mentioned? Well, VisualPolitik community, both NATO and Romania have analysed Moscow's capabilities in the area and have all realised one thing: that what they have to do is to prepare themselves, above all, to slow Russia down, and if necessary, confront them by air and not so much by sea. The attack on the Ukrainian freighter in the Black Sea that we discussed earlier was carried out from a Russian aircraft, which seems to confirm this hypothesis. Well, the thing is that NATO has already set to work in Romania, and what we're going to see in this video is precisely what they're working on and what they expect. Could Romania become NATO's next key partner in the East? Why is the Russian fleet not considered a threat? What plans are on the table and how far do they go? Well, in this video, we're going to answer these questions and more. Listen up.
The MK base.
Take a look at this news item.
United States announces the pending sale of F-35A fighters to Romania.
32 F-35s, along with 20 or so F-16s, already constitutes a considerable air force. By itself, it could probably stop any Russian attack, at least in the initial hours. But of course, let's not kid ourselves. It's still a small force, especially if we take into account that all 100% of the aircraft are never operational at any one time. In Romania, they're aware of that, and that's why Bucharest has been pressuring and convincing its partners to choose this country to establish nothing less than NATO's main airbase in all of Europe. And guess what? They've done it. Romania will soon become the center of the Atlantic Alliance's air defense, right on Russia's doorstep. More specifically, this absolutely critical piece of infrastructure will be established at a base with Soviet origins, the Mikhail Koganechanu base, which is also referred to as the MK base.
Located only 97 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, the MK base is the easternmost military center of the entire Atlantic Alliance. This base was practically abandoned and forgotten for decades, but has now been chosen by NATO to become the new center of its air force. In fact, according to the established plans, it will become the largest NATO airbase in Europe, even ahead of the very well-known German base at Ramstein.
NATO intends to station more than 10,000 troops there on a permanent basis, and to spend more than 2.5 billion euros to provide the base with reinforced hangars, resistance to airstrikes, as well as rapid weapons deployment platforms. And although it will take years to reach the 10,000 military personnel that NATO intends to station there, for now, the Romanians have already moved part of their F-16 fleet there, specifically the fighters they've purchased from Norway. The question is, if it seems sensible to have the capability to control the Black Sea and protect the eastern flank for NATO, why on earth hasn't it been done before? Well, the answer is simple. There was fear of a Russian reaction that would trigger tensions with NATO, something that doesn't matter as much ever since Putin invaded Ukraine. We've told you, despite all the Kremlin's threats and justifications, what this war has done is precisely to strengthen and expand NATO. At the same time, many of the red lines that existed up to now have also been eroded. Among them is the establishment of a macro airbase of the alliance a few kilometers from Ukraine.
Russia warns Romania over building largest NATO military base in Europe.
Now, let's be clear. It stands to reason that Putin is worried. Why? Because the base we're talking about could basically mean the end of any Russian hopes to control this sea. And this VisualPolitik community is a completely new scenario. Up until the invasion of Ukraine, Moscow maintained maritime superiority in this sea. That's no longer the case, because the Ukrainians have shattered the Russian fleet in these very waters. On top of that, Russia also had the largest deployment of air capabilities in this region. For example, Moscow has been trying for years to consolidate its air superiority by moving some of its best fighters to this area, as well as deploying bombers such as the Tupolev Tu-22 and Tu-95 at its air bases near the Black Sea. These Soviet antiquities, however, have become the Kremlin's favorite alternative to the more advanced Russian Tu-160 bombers.
For the first time, the anti-aircraft missile units of the Ukrainian Air Force destroyed a Tupolev 22 M3 long-range strategic bomber, the carrier of Kh-22 cruise missiles, which the Russian terrorists used to attack peaceful Ukrainian cities.
Well, now imagine that you're Russian. Suddenly, a base with dozens of F-35 stealth fighters, which Romania and other countries will receive, is planted just across from your coasts and a few kilometers from Crimea. Imagine modern Eurofighter Typhoons operating alongside advanced American American MQ-9 Reaper reconnaissance drones, and all protected by Patriot anti-aircraft defenses and Harpoon coastal missiles, among other equipment. From a strategic point of view, it would be a nightmare, wouldn't it? Well, this nightmare is exactly what NATO is starting to set up in Romania, just a stone's throw away from Ukraine. And that's not all. On top of that, if the war drags on, this base could become a strategic point for Ukrainian military logistics, a repair and supply center for its new F-16s, and a huge troop training camp. And don't forget the most important thing. In military terms, this facility is very, very close to the Crimean Peninsula. And do you know what this means? Effectively, that the soon-to-be largest NATO airbase will be a stone's throw away from Sevastopol Naval Base, currently the main base of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Certainly the most strategic, along with the Arctic one. You understand why this is so important, don't you? Romania will become the Atlantic Alliance's air bastion in the not-too-distant future, and with that, the country will gain key strategic weight within the alliance. Now, we're talking a lot about air capabilities, fighters, and bombing, but if we're talking about dominance in the Black Sea area, why on earth aren't we talking about ships, frigates, and the like? Wouldn't it make more sense to devote these huge resources to increasing maritime capabilities and turning Romania into a major naval base to be able to confront the Russian fleet in the Black Sea? Why take a gamble on the skies? Well, we're about to take a look at that right now.
The feared Russia?
Control of the waters remains important. As recently as this year, Romania joined Bulgaria and Turkey in a mission to eliminate Russian sea mines in these waters. Because, just so you know, since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, Moscow has planted around 500 mines in this sea. Still, one thing is certain. Neither NATO nor Romania itself is putting as much emphasis on naval capabilities as on air capabilities. The question is, why? Well, the answer is simple. Russia's maritime power in this sea is no longer as great as it was before the war, and NATO countries no longer consider it a priority. To begin with, Russia has suffered huge losses in its Black Sea fleet since the beginning of its invasion. I'm sure you will remember news like this.
Russia's Moskva cruiser sinks following Ukrainian claim of missile strike. Ukraine claims sinking of Russia sub in Sevastopol.
Despite not even having a navy, the Ukrainians have sunk or damaged between 15 and 26 ships belonging to the Russian Black Sea fleet. That assumes that in the most optimistic scenario for the Russians, about 1/3 of their fleet in the region has been totally neutralized. And keep in mind that we aren't only talking about small patrol boats or corvettes, we're even talking about the flagship of the Russian fleet in this region, the Moskva, which was the 3rd largest Russian warship. Now, how could the Ukrainians have achieved this, and what do Romania and the rest of NATO seem to have learned from these operations? Well, you see, once again, if we look at Ukraine, we see that there's a clear pattern. There's no need to spend millions on frigates, submarines, and aircraft carriers. It's enough to armor the coasts with anti-ship missiles. Missiles such as the American Harpoon missiles mentioned earlier, the French Exocet missiles, or the Sea Venom missiles that can be launched from helicopters. Well, no sooner said than done.
Romania buys naval strike missile coastal batteries in $217 million deal.
Bucharest is also rapidly improving its capabilities in so-called anti-surface warfare.
This is a type of naval warfare that does not necessarily require expensive ships, but is based on eliminating enemy capabilities from airplanes, helicopters, and even onshore installations. And that's what they're gradually doing in the Romanian armed forces.
The idea is that with a declining Russian fleet and the threat of such defenses, Moscow will not dare to approach the Romanian coast. In other words, pure and simple deterrence, a much more cost-effective strategy in this case. Despite all this, Russia continues to add new vessels to its Black Sea fleet, with at least 2 new ships added since May this year. 2 ships that have been partially built at the Zelenodolsk shipyard in Tatarstan. And VisualPolitik community, pay attention to this, because here we come to the second of the great strategic problems that Russia has: logistics. Look at where Zelenodolsk is, the site where Russia has built the bulk of its two most recent Black Sea ships. Wait, Russia builds ships for the Black Sea 1,500 kilometers from the body of water where they are to be used? Yes, just as you can see. Now, why is that? Well, to begin with, the most advanced shipyards under Russian control in this sea are Sevastopol, which is in Crimea, and in Novorossiysk. You can probably imagine what's happening with Sevastopol. It's too risky to build new warships within range of Ukrainian missiles. And Novorossiysk is not an option either, because it's a less advanced shipyard. And to top it off, it has serious supply problems because of restrictions on its passage to the Black Sea, and how far it is from the country's main industrial centers. So Moscow has to scramble to replenish its fleet by making long trips down navigable rivers and overland until they can be used in the region. Do you have any idea of the enormous logistical costs involved? How much do you think it would cost to move in this manner? A frigate that could weigh more than 4,000 tons, for example. You would have to do some real juggling. A real logistical nightmare that plays in favor of NATO, and that will make it very difficult for Russia to replenish its fleet lost during this war. And that partly explains why their shipbuilding pace is currently much slower than the rate at which they have been losing ships to the Ukrainians. And to top it all off, Russia is not only facing a problem of warship transportation, but also one of production and deliveries. So, with all this in mind, it's no wonder that both NATO and Romania are focusing their efforts on making the country the epicenter of the alliance's air capabilities. But at this point, we'd like to know your opinion. Do you think NATO is right to strengthen its air force in Romania and move away from naval capabilities? Will the MK base serve to underpin the deterrence of Russia in the Black Sea? Well, leave us your opinions below in the comments and let's start a debate. And don't forget something important. If you liked this video, please like it and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so you won't miss any upcoming news. As always, thank you for watching, all the best, see you next time.